biggest risk that we have in informal settlements is fires and floods. The reason that we have a problem is because we do not have sufficient housing, we do not have a national urbanisation policy yet.
It's your small and medium-sized cities that are starting to show their highest level of disaster risk. We have one of the fastest rates of urbanisation.
With most urban risks, particularly urban fires and urban flood risks, a lot of these risks are developmentally driven.
The ability to respond to the changes in the urban environment often tend to manifest themselves in an increased disaster risk.
Natural hazards does not pose a risk to disasters if social vulnerable factors are not there. The reason people are at risk to flooding and fires is because of poor planning in those areas and those people having no other choice to go anywhere else.
We've got something like 226 informal settlements for the city of Cape Town. Your informal settlements alone occupy something like over 500,000 people.
They are often in areas where there are wetlands or high water tables or areas where there are storm water channels.
During summer, of course, we've also got the problem again of fires.
Structural fires are more human-induced. The cause of such fires are related to either social behaviour or because of people's economic situation. The density of those populations exacerbates the intensity of informal settlement fires.
You have one shack fire, and if the wind is in the right direction, it can end up with 1,500 shacks.
Should a candle top over, it would take an informal dwelling about 1.5 minutes to come down in flames.
We've got to, in collaboration with many other role players, make an attempt to reduce risk, disaster risk.
To reduce such risk, it's not to focus on the natural hazard or the technological hazard, but it's actually to focus on the root causes of vulnerability. Why are people migrating from the rural areas to the cities?
A lot of the work that we will do will be around supporting, enabling community-based organisations to engage much more actively as citizens in their own development processes. There's been a tendency by the state, and that even one still sees it, reflected in sort of statements by Lindiwe Sisulu around the eradication of slums. But the idea of upgrading is actually almost completely different to that. It's about saying that these are in fact spaces that can in fact have potential to be upgraded.
I won't say there's a lack of resources because there is money available in government, but because there's a lack of foresight to plan ahead, the government tends to just manage the immediate risks, and so they basically just investing into recovery and response.
There is no attempt really being made to access particularly the resources from the Upgrading Informal Settlements program, which allows for funding for long-term forward planning.
For every dollar that you would have invested in developmental initiatives, you would save $7 in recovery.
Unfortunately, a lot of the work that's being done right now is still very engineering focused. So there's a huge tendency to invest mostly in things like rudimentary services, which would be your water sanitation, access roads, and very little of real investment into sort of social transformation. It's actually about a social and physical upliftment of the community. And the idea then is not to just work at a project level, but to actually take this up and start saying, well, how can citizens influence how the city is structured, how it's designed, in a way in which it allows for them to be accommodated.
If we do not do that investment and we don't move boldly and we don't plan informal settlements with the necessary infrastructure, then we will always be putting those band-aid plasters on the wounds.